The zone is becoming increasingly.
I am so lonely. All the other Viltrumites are scared of me. No one talks to me. They think I am unstable. They send me from planet to planet, committing atrocities in their name. And as I get better at it, they fear me more and more. I am a victim of my own success. Conquest. I don't even get a real name.
Increasingly unstable.
Alright, so we started really strong with this series. I mean, no matter how you cut it, Stalker Shadow of Chernobyl was one impressively deep package, and any game coming out after it was going to have to really try in order to meet that same series high point. And if you've watched the entirety of this video, it should probably go without saying, but in my opinion, that is exactly what Clear Sky did. A lot of people tend to lump this game in as the lesser of the three, and I don't know if I think that's fair. This game offered Stalker fans the exact same gameplay and visuals they fell in love with the first time around, only this time plus a little more. Yes, what they did with ballistics and accuracy was not a smart move, but realistically you can mod that out of the game with just a little bit less effort than it took me to say this sentence. Sure, you could argue it's pretty damn similar to the first game in a lot of ways, but I think that's the tightrope the dev team was trying to walk. They wanted to give us all these new improvements and all the original mechanics and systems they intended to include in the first game, but more than anything, they wanted to make sure it still felt like a Stalker game, and it most definitely does. Everything added here makes for a natural progression of what can be found in the original title. It really does just feel like it's somehow becoming more Stalker. This entry may very well have been eclipsed by the release of the next game in the series, but if we're going to judge it based on its own merits, I would say it scores much higher than a lot of people are willing to admit. I mean, think about it. At the time, we weren't looking for a flashy new experience with AAA tier graphics. We Stalker fans only had one wish: give us just one more chance to immerse ourselves in the zone. We wanted to see that world and its inhabitants again, giving us just one more excuse to retrace our footsteps through miles of territory and an environment that we just flat out love being in. Now, it's not like I'm discounting or trying to downplay just how inaccurate guns were in the game, but even on launch there was a fix for this: upgrade your weapons. Now, realistically, that's not the most user-friendly and intuitive approach to take with game design, but think of the audience they were serving. Stalker, as a series, is about as far away from user-friendliness or intuitiveness as you could possibly imagine. Like I said in the last video, this is a series you have to teach yourself to play properly. Once again, I would totally recommend something like Arsenal Overhaul if you are planning on tackling this one, as it really changes the combat from something that's really challenging to something that's incredibly fun and really challenging. In fact, the new ballistics, damage output, and accuracy tweaks in this mod makes it one of my favorite gameplay experiences in the series. No joke, I was blown away at how much I enjoyed this playthrough. And after all that praise, I'm sure it doesn't need to be said, but obviously I do recommend you guys install Clear Sky right now. except if you haven't played a Stalker game before. As crazy as it sounds, this refined experience just will not be appreciated properly by someone who doesn't have the context of how the series used to play and look before it. I know this is going to sound really dumb, but to truly get everything you can out of these sequels, you really have to have played what came before them. It's counterintuitive for sure. I mean, after hearing me praise this game as being everything the last one was but more, you would figure the more fun, refined title would be the one to recommend. You know, best foot forward and all, but I really think a lot of what makes this game great would be lost on a newcomer. I don't know, maybe I'm out of line here, or maybe my love for the series is causing me to unconsciously gatekeep it, but if possible, try to play these games in order. Then you can get a feel for what each one brought to the table and how each successive entry incrementally improved on the last. Truth be told, I used to agree with the popular belief that this is the weaker title in the series, but after this most recent game of Clear Sky, I've really fallen in love with it, and well, here's hoping you will too. And, well, I guess it's a good thing we're wrapping up now because it looks like an emission's approaching, so we're gonna have to cut this artifact hunt a little short, but we will be coming right back with a review of the absolute golden child of this franchise. I hope I get to see all of you back here again when we do, but until then, happy hunting, Stalkers. Good news, Stalkers. I got a hot tip on a massive stash of artifacts. Now, I know we've already made 2 trips into the heart of the zone already, but trust me, this one's gonna be worth it. You know, I can't really say why for sure, but for some reason I get the feeling that this might be the last time we brave the anomaly fields and mutants that make up this harsh landscape. So I hope you've readied yourself for yet another walk on that tightrope that is the Chernobyl exclusion zone, because as most of you know by now, once you're in, there is no turning back. Stalkers, welcome to the zone.
Okay, there's a way through here. Let's hope it leads somewhere a little less deadly.
Like we've covered previously, the development of the first Stalker title was one hell of a roller coaster. GSC Game World had these lofty ideas for what they wanted to implement, but sadly spent a lot of their time just making sure the damn thing would work on launch day. So when the time came to follow up on their success, they essentially took some of the previously unfinished work they had done during SOC's development and created a sequel out of it, and in doing so helped cement the world they had created into the minds of us, the fans. Sure, we would be revisiting most of the locations from the first game, but to be fair, that's kind of what we wanted to do anyways. So if you could call Clear Sky an expansion pack for Shadow of Chernobyl, Call of Pripyat would be those 2 games combined. There would be new guns, new assets, and new locations, but essentially, this is the world of Stalker perfected. Of course, that doesn't mean there are no flaws to be found. This is still a Stalker game after all. It just means the devs finally got a shot at adding most of what was supposed to make it into that first title, plus the kind of fine-tuning you would expect from a sequel. But some of you may be wondering, would this new title solve some of the issues even hardened fans had with the shallow amount of plot delivered in the first 2 games? Well, there's only one way to find out.
Watch out! Controller!
Okay, so remember how Shadow of Chernobyl was light on narrative but heavy on environmental storytelling, and how Clear Sky tried to remedy that? Well, I think for this last entry, the developers said, well, an impossibly thin story worked for us once, maybe it'll work again. Call of Pripyat starts off with a recap of not only the events of the last 2 games, but the zone itself. Oh yeah, and I should probably mention the mod I'm using for this playthrough sort of acts as this intro from the game. So if you plan on using the Arsenal Overhaul mod and you've never played the game before, maybe start up a new game in vanilla first just so you can see this cutscene. I know it's not the most important thing in the world and it'll likely be information you already know anyways, but it helps contextualize things and I kinda like it. And getting back to that intro, like I said before, it tells us about the zone's origins. First, we have the Chernobyl nuclear power plant meltdown, causing the government to cordon off the area around the disaster, dubbing it the exclusion zone. And now that they have themselves 30 kilometers of real estate where the public isn't allowed to go, and even if they were, no one would want to be there anyways, they begin filling the place with research labs and bunkers where all the things governments aren't supposed to do can be conducted in secret. Flash forward 40 years and a massive event takes place that sees all of the army and science personnel within the confines of the zone dying instantly. After this second disaster, scientific expeditions into the zone begin to witness inhuman monsters roaming the landscape, likely those who were unlucky enough to be in the zone when it blew. There's also reports of the environment being twisted and warped. Small pockets of space contain anomalies that can conjure flames or electricity out of nowhere or can crush a person with severely magnified gravity, which is good enough reason to stay away forever if you ask me, but there is a human component going on here that basically ensures no one ever will. Inside these reality-bending anomalies, people start finding small trinkets with what you might call odd properties to them. Perpetual energy factories, balls of frozen fire, and gravity-defying objects, all small enough to fit in your pocket. These artifacts being such obvious scientific curiosities, everyone from state-sponsored actors to private businesses are willing to pay top dollar for them, which creates an economy of buyers, middlemen, sellers, and the stalkers who venture into the zone to procure these balls of real-life materia. With more and more interest being drawn to the zone, eventually people start testing its limits. One such stalker is Strelok, who in the events of the first game was able to turn off the Brain Scorcher, a giant antenna array that broadcasts some kind of brain-scrambling signal that can turn a regular person into a drooling zombie in no time and acts as an impenetrable field, keeping stalkers from getting to the power plant at the center of the zone. After this barrier was eliminated, the zone's many factions all made a run on the center at once, leading to a massive war. Looking to capitalize on this, the Ukrainian government set up a secret mission that would see several helicopters infiltrating the zone and making a straight line for the center, each one coming from a different angle. These choppers were supposed to be equipped with anti-anomaly measures, and the pilots had maps letting them know where the major anomalies they needed to avoid were. And that operation lasted all of about 5 minutes before each helicopter suffered some kind of technical failure. The government, not being very happy about the millions of dollars of hardware they just scrapped, suspected anyone and everyone. Everything from sabotage to all-out military attacks were considered, but to get any real answers, they were going to need boots on the ground. So they sent in our protagonist, Major Alexander Degtyarev. He was inserted into the zone and given a false identity, the goal being for him to pose as a normal, everyday stalker, and in doing so, blend in enough to get some real info on what's going on. The reasoning there being pretty strong, as your average stalker would like nothing less than to put several bullets into any soldier they come across, and as such, probably isn't going to tell them about any anti-military subterfuge they've been involved in. And then the game just sort of starts. And yeah, maybe that was a long time to spend just talking about a game's intro, but trust me, there's a good reason for that. After that intro is finished, the amount of mainline story you come across in your playthrough is, well, it's almost laughable.
So you're the whole expert, eh? Don't worry, you can count on the boys to take the muties out nice and quick.
You take control of the Major as he enters the swamps of Zaton, and your goal is to blend in at the local stalker post made from an old ship. Using that as a base of operations, you venture out inspecting each of the downed helicopters, finding out each one of them suffered some kind of a catastrophic failure. After coming across a black box listing possible evacuation points, you follow the clues to a surviving helicopter pilot and discover the evac will be going down inside the ghost town of Pripyat. Getting there isn't going to be as easy as it sounds, though. Even though the center is technically open now, most of the people who know how to safely get there likely died in that first raid. So we stumble across old documents that point towards a secret underground tunnel connecting Pripyat and Jupiter. To get through it though, we'll need a few buddies to watch our back and a suit with a closed cycle oxygen system because the military in their infinite wisdom flooded the tunnel with toxic gas before they abandoned it. Once through the underground passage, our team gets jumped by a squad of soldiers, forcing the Major to come out of hiding and identifying himself as a member of the Special Forces. He links up with a unit of survivors from the failed Operation Fairway, and so far all the info he's been able to collect is stuff that could have just been assumed from the start. Each helicopter went down, and there isn't evidence that they were attacked, so chalking this all up as a loss, Major Degtyarev and the survivors of the mission decide to jump ship ASAP. But before they do, well, you know what, let's make sure we don't ruin this for everyone. If you're looking to jump into this one blind, make sure to either skip to the timestamp on screen, click past the chapter marked spoilers, or click the link in the description to make sure I don't mess up that first playthrough for you.
What do you think? We're here for fun? Why so trigger happy? Can't you see that we're all friends here? Me and Agent have been through a lot. Trust me on that.
Okay, so our little motley crew is ready to move out when they get a reading on something that's coming their way fast. Thinking it might be a monolith squad or a herd of mutants ready to take them out, everyone digs in and prepares for an all-out fight. And the amount of tension in this is so well done. If you don't already know what's coming, your mind starts trying to expect what the game's gonna throw at you next, which could be anything at this point. Well, the moment finally comes, and instead of some kind of a mutated horror, we're joined by Strelok, the main character of the first game and sort of the most important person in the zone.
My name is Strelok.
You're the stalker who disabled the Scorcher?
Yes.
He lets everyone know about what he's been through in the last 2 games, including the hot gossip on Sea Consciousness and the truth behind the zone's existence. Following from the good ending of SOC, Strelok informs the group that he sort of shot up the only chance they ever had at controlling the zone, and now that it's been unrestrained, it's going to keep growing. Meaning soon it won't just be Russia's problem. In fact, it won't be long till it's all of Europe's problem, and there's nothing that says it won't continue growing from there. But some of the more astute among you might be wondering what the hell became of the whole figure out what shit on the secret military plan storyline. Well, Strelok puts a pin in that too, and it's likely the most anticlimactic wrap-up you've ever seen in your life.
The reasons are obvious.
Strelok explains to these hardened soldiers something even the most green stalker already knows about. Anomalies move around after emissions. So the anomaly charts they had were long outdated before a single chopper even left the tarmac. Now, on one hand, yes, it is cool to see how the military deals with something most people who've spent even a little bit of time in the zone consider to be novice-level info, but we've just spent 30 or so hours on the edge of our seat waiting till we find out what happened to these choppers. And the conclusion to what was built up to be some great mystery ended up being what most Stalker fans would have immediately thought of as a solution, but then disregarded because it was too simple. If you cut out everything in between the beginning intro and this dialogue cutscene, it would go something like, hey, listen, you've got to figure out what happened to these helicopters. They all crashed, and it definitely was not anomalies. It was anomalies. But now that we have the spoilers out of the way, let's link up with the rest of the group and tie this all together.
We must inform the HQ of this as soon as possible.
I'll contact my commanders right after the emission.
Alright, without spoiling anything, I'll just say the conclusion to the Operation Fairway catastrophe is far from satisfying. On the plus side, there is a very late game revelation that will dull the sting a bit, but it's totally unrelated to the story's main thread. That being said, there is a lot about this ending I really liked. My issue is more how they strung me along for the entire runtime of the game, only to wrap up the one and only story we've had so far in a single dialogue box. Then the remaining 20 minutes or so of the game is devoted to a new plot thread introduced so close to the end that you don't have more than 2 conversations about it till you've seen the credits. It seems to me this was yet another aspect of the Stalker series that was meant to be much bigger and more detailed, but had to be trimmed down due to either budget issues, engine issues, or maybe both. So you might assume me shitting on the one and only driving narrative is a negative, and it definitely is, but just like before, you'll be given a lot of smaller side stories to work your way through, and again, like before, a lot of these could have served as an even better main storyline if given a little more love and care. Don't get me wrong, I like the idea of a mystery revolving around finding out what happened to the military choppers that crashed, but investigating missing stalkers only to find out a hemoglobin addict is to blame, well, it's much more interesting. If I may be so bold, I think maybe GSC Game World might be misunderstanding their audience here a bit. They did a brilliant job of setting up the zone in the first game, and we love being here, but I think the best way to move forward is to not focus so much on the zone as the driving plot, but instead use it as a backdrop for really interesting stuff to take place in. This is a place where criminals on the run from the law, drug addicts, and pioneering explorers all congregate, and there is likely to be much more human drama here than the zone could ever produce. And if you ask me, much of the appeal here is how little we know about the exclusion zone, and I do get the desire to further flesh it out, but I think each time you do, you risk stripping away a little bit of what makes it so interesting and unique.
Go to hell, freaking muties!
So giving the story here a grade is going to be a little hard. On one end, we have what I would call a great setup and a well-cultivated mystery, but on the other, in my opinion, is a very unsatisfying conclusion to that mystery, so it's far from all bad, but not quite good either. At the risk of being even more of a broken record than I already am, the main story in a Stalker game is always just a thin thread used to pull you through what is an incredible setting. It is totally possible to ignore the main story in one of these games and still have a fulfilling and satisfying experience. A point made all the more clear when you see how many Stalker mods remove any and all story beats only to replace them with smaller side stories and a more free play focus. Something you can actually get with Call of Pripyat in vanilla form, by the way. The free play part, not the missing story part. At the end of the game, you're asked if you want to stay in the zone or leave it. If you choose to stay, you can essentially play the game forever. Artifacts are often reset after emissions, which gives you a theoretically infinite resource to farm, and you will never be so overpowered or so well equipped that a wandering pack of snorks or a single pissed off stalker won't be able to do you in. I think it says a lot about the Stalker fandom that the introduction of this free play feature would work its way into a massive amount of high quality mods for all 3 games. I think that shows what we want here isn't more curated and finely honed stories, although, to be honest, we might not hate you for giving us more.
The boss is over there. Go talk to him.
But instead, a small reason to continue to exist here in a video game world that is unlike anything the medium has ever seen before. So again, I can't really pass judgment on the story here. It's a little more complicated than that, but I will try to condense this into something at least resembling an opinion. Stalker Call of Pripyat, in my opinion, started off strong with a story that seemed like it would clue us into some of the zone's secrets, but when it eventually doesn't, most of your time with the game will have been spent simply living in its world and not interacting with its story. So while I can totally understand being scared off by the initial statement that the story here has a less than satisfying conclusion, just know that is very much par for the course here, and unlike most video games, the main story is not going to be what keeps you here. Damn, I guess that dumbass quote from John Carmack is finally applicable, so let's rework it a little bit. Story in a Stalker game is like story in a porno. It's expected to be there, but it's not exactly why you're there in the first place.
Let's try to get by them without making any noise. They're waking up! Run!
The first Stalker game set the standard, and when it came time to follow that up, the developers aimed to include all the stuff they originally wanted to see in that maiden voyage. Sadly, Stalker fans weren't quite so accepting when Clear Sky came out, and to be fair, it's understandable why. Much of what Clear Sky did at launch, despite being taken from actual work done on the first title, felt very half-baked. So the big question is, what direction did they take with the third and, at the time of writing, final entry in the series? In front of GSC Game World laid 2 paths. Heading to the left would have them going back to their roots and further improving the foundation of Shadow of Chernobyl. The right would see them fleshing out some of the more innovative ideas seen in Clear Sky. So which one did they choose? Well, they just sort of ran straight forward in between the two.
So, you managed to drag your ass over here? Bravo!
Stalker Call of Pripyat could be seen as the series' greatest hits, a combination of all the things that worked for both releases living inside one game. In fact, this combination of elements would be so well accepted that most big mods for SOC and CS would basically be made up of fan-made attempts at including Call of Pripyat's mechanics. And there's a lot to cover here, so I'm gonna have to treat you like you're already well versed in this series. If not, I should have a link to my videos covering the previous Stalker games here in the upper right hand corner or in the description. So if you start to feel lost, go ahead and enroll yourself in Chernobyl University to get your master's degree in stalking.
Stop right there! Hold your weapon and don't you move!
One thing that won't be so clear from the start but will eventually show itself is the fact that COP is a much more confined game as far as the setting goes. Of course, we're still inside the Chernobyl exclusion zone, but as stalkers, we're kind of used to being able to visit several locations within it on our journey. This time around, our adventure will be limited to just 3 areas. You start off in the swampy Zatan, then move on to Jupiter, and eventually the titular dead city Pripyat. Now at first this does sound like a downgrade. After all, the last 2 games feature 10 and 11 unique locations respectively. On top of that, what made both of those earlier titles so appealing is the thought that revisiting old familiar stomping grounds was sort of baked into the development of a Stalker game. Like I mentioned in my Clear Sky video, a lot of what I appreciated about it was the fact that it let me relive my memories in a lot of these locations. I mean, honestly, how many of you guys watched the Stalker 2 trailer and audibly screamed to yourselves when they showed footage of Corden or what looked like the Great Swamps? At least for me, this was always one of the most unique and interesting parts of the franchise. Taking that into consideration, it would be easy to see this as a big downside, and maybe it is at least partly, but on the plus side, these 3 new locations are absolutely massive in scale. It's kind of hard to say for sure, but I would imagine 3 of the smaller spots in previous games, like say Corden, Garbage, and Rostock, could easily fit inside of Zatan alone. So you'll get that same Stalker experience, visiting all kinds of abandoned villages and anomaly fields, only you won't have to sit through any loading screens to get to most of them. Actually, something I never really noticed until sitting down to get my thoughts together for this script is the fact that there aren't any traditional exits or entrances leading from one zone to the other like we're used to in the series. Instead, you can find guides who will lead you in and out of your current area, which isn't exactly bad or good, just something I thought was interesting. But getting back to my original point, these are some incredibly big plots of land to explore. All 3 of these new maps are massive, and each one is jam-packed with places to go and interesting things to see. So I would estimate you won't be missing out on much, if any, potential content when going from those earlier games to this one. But I think the big draw with the more compartmentalized design of those games is being able to drastically change the sort of environment you're in at a moment's notice. If you happen to be tired of the behemoth mounds of scrap and garbage and want a little more color in your life, you could always go to the Red Forest or hop on over to the Army warehouses. Having a good number of zones broken up by loading screens meant the devs could have a lot more freedom with making each one unique as far as color palette and scenery goes, and yeah, that is something you'll miss out on with COP. I don't want to come off as overly negative about this though. Like I said, these are massive areas and they really do have an incredible amount of content squeezed into them. All 3 zones have 1 million landmarks to visit and loot, and several huge anomaly fields for artifact hunting. Mutants still stick to environments they're more tuned to, like bloodsuckers preferring swampy spots for some reason or boars sticking to more open fields, and you'll definitely have to keep an eye on ruined buildings or anything else that might give natural cover to bandits or monolith fighters. So navigating these large areas should feel exactly like you're used to. These being such huge playable settings, the developers made the well-appreciated decision to include a guide role to the stalkers who randomly traverse the zone. So if you want to, let's say, visit the boiler anomaly, but you're being dragged down by more than 100 pounds of ammo and gear looted from a mutant versus stalker fight that you may or may not have decided to stay out of, well, you can just find a gathering of stalkers and pay someone a small fare basically to fast travel you there. Oh, and one tiny thing I thought was really cool is the fact that the same group of stalkers that offer to fast travel you to somewhere will load in with you at that location, and then they'll start running back to wherever they were headed in the first place. It's a small touch, but one that I really appreciated. Okay, so I've been blabbing about the game's setting this whole time. I'm sure a few of you are wondering how it actually feels to play the game, and once again, that is sort of a complicated issue.
We await your orders, O Monolith.
On the plus side, the upgrade system from Clear Sky is back, which is awesome for 2 reasons. Not only is it really fun tuning a gun towards your playstyle, but that gives you even more incentive to explore, since the tools required for more advanced upgrades will need to be found before a technician can perform them. I'm also incredibly happy to say that these guys learned from their last release and made sure guns were still usable before you put thousands of dollars into their upgrades, which translates into you're not going to have to worry about spending a good 30 rounds of 5.56 at point blank range before you actually hit something in front of you. This time around, they seem to have included a nice balance to things by making sure really powerful weapons also came with some kind of a downside, like much more kick or lowered magazine capacity. And if you'll remember, one of my complaints in the last video was that some mods, in trying to combat that problem by making guns pretty accurate from the start, well, they ended up making the upgraded forms of those guns pretty damn overpowered, and at the risk of sounding like a total hypocrite, I kind of missed that. Which leads into a bit of criticism. See, the gunplay in Call of Pripyat, while still being fun and very satisfying, just didn't hit those same highs that Clear Sky did. Now, in total honesty, I'm talking about the gunplay resulting from applying the Arsenal Overhaul mod to Clear Sky, so you would assume it's not exactly an apples-to-apples comparison. But I'm actually using a version of Arsenal Overhaul for COP as well. I was so damn impressed with how much this mod's tweaks to gun damage and accuracy added to Clear Sky's gameplay that I immediately pulled the trigger on using that same mod but tuned for its sequel, and I just feel like something's not quite the same here. Guns are certainly more powerful than vanilla Call of Pripyat, but they're just not on that same level of lethality that I saw in CS about a week ago. Even at the highest difficulty, I just wasn't getting that same feeling from popping out of cover and sending 2 well-placed shots to some bandit's chest and seeing him collapse to the floor. It seems like it's taking more shots to down enemies, and that's not the worst thing in the world, but I sort of prefer the more simulation-like gameplay that came from knowing I was never more than 1 or 2 bullets away from seeing this screen. I was able to get my hands on a pump-action shotgun that gave me that one-shot, one-kill sort of feeling, which was nice, but man, I would have loved to have seen that in the rest of my arsenal. Going back and taking a look at the download for Arsenal Overhaul, I noticed that they included some optional changes in a separate folder for stuff like Stalkers all speaking Russian or traitor balances, but there was also a realistic damage folder that I must have just skipped over. So if you do install this mod, I would 100% recommend using that add-on. Also, as a fun little aside, AO mod on COP replaces the main menu music with a theme song from one of my all-time favorite horror movies, The Thing, which is just a nice bonus for a mod I was going to recommend anyways. And since I'm obviously unable to stop comparing this game to Clear Sky, hopefully you guys remember that title's approach to gameplay, including a pretty robust faction war system that would have you taking part in a whole lot of big firefights with more than 10 stalkers on each side. Something I thought went absolutely perfectly with Arsenal Overhaul's reworked damage and accuracy models. And sadly, Call of Pripyat ditches the multi-person skirmishes along with a focus on interacting with the zone's factions, something I would flat out call a downside. Now, I know it was a bit annoying being called to some small outpost to help them deal with like 2 blind dogs, but I really enjoyed having clear-cut territories for each faction to inhabit and sort of being able to control who was where. Really though, it's those massive 20-man shootouts that did it for me. Feeling like you're just a small contributor in a larger battle was really cool, and I feel like the wide open areas in COP were just itching to have a few of those taking place in them. You will come across groups of maybe 3 stalkers shooting it out with rivals or mutants, and sure, that is still awesome to see, but it really just does not compare. The emissions from Clear Sky are back and somehow even more terrifying. Not because they're more frequent or because the bigger landscape might mean you're further from cover a lot of the time, although both of those things are still true, but because the AI system, A-Life, seems to be set to maximum randomness in this game. Some of these things may be explainable by mods or me just hitting a weird string of luck with A-Life, but I had a lot of odd stuff happen in this playthrough. At one point, I walked into the Stalker outpost in Zatan to see a man's body just floating through the air, and once I loaded into Yanov Station, and for some reason, 2 bandits and a snork had developed some sort of friendship and were just hanging out with each other. Now that is funny because bandits and mutants are not allowed anywhere near the station, but also when the 2 bandits saw me, they ran outside and developed some sort of an infatuation with me and would shoot at me through the walls every time I was visible. I also had mutants attack me and some NPCs during a scripted cutscene on more than one occasion, so factoring random blowouts into the mix makes things real damn interesting. At one point, an mission hit right as I was taking part in a side quest that had me and a group of other stalkers pitted against a controller inside of a tunnel. So not only was my team being brainwashed into seeing me as an enemy, but I couldn't move around to avoid their gunfire or the controller's long-range attacks because leaving the small room I was in would mean instant death via supernatural radiation tornado. And if it wasn't clear by the tone of my voice, these were not complaints here. I have always enjoyed the zone's random nature, and while in any other game stuff like this would rightly be called a downside, in this series it's at least a part of the reason why we love it so much. Continuing with the compliments, I really liked being able to explore Pripyat here. The whole area has this amazingly creepy feeling to it with all kinds of mysteries everywhere you look, and the addition of seeing a city left abandoned for decades really adds to that. The side missions outside of the main story path in COP might be some of the most interesting in the series, but it feels like there's less of them. And on that note, I cleared COP in less time than I typically spend on these games. I'd wager that's due to there being a little less story to get through here, but the lessened number of areas probably plays a role as well. Of course, when I mention a shorter runtime, it's more in terms of a first playthrough. Most of us series vets typically rush through the stories of these games so that we can unlock every location, and at that point the real game starts. Which translates into a potentially infinite series of runs for artifacts so that you can sell them for ammo, which will be spent of course on the next artifact run, fending off fellow stalkers and mutants. Now it's been a while since I free played COP like that, but I don't remember it being noticeably less long than the other entries in the series. How I judge that is I keep a game going for as long as I can until I get disinterested, which usually hits the 100-hour mark no matter which game I'm playing. So I guess take that for what it is, a totally subjective measurement of content that only an idiot or a Stalker fan would use. One of my favorite aspects about any Stalker game is how you end up playing it so differently than you would any other FPS. You don't rush into danger in these games. You find yourself very carefully approaching possible threats here, and out of instinct, you'll likely be making most of that approach while moving from cover to cover. You'll start being able to tell when an enemy's packing real long-range heat based solely on the sound of their gunfire, and you definitely won't be running out of that cover without leaning around to make sure the coast is clear. Or if you do, it'll be a mistake you won't make again. Well, I have really good news for you. All of that is most definitely back, and it is just as much fun as it's ever been. So at least GSC seems to really understand the core of what players want out of these games. Of course, shooting in a Stalker game can sort of be overemphasized when you watch reviews like this on YouTube. In attempting to make a video that's entertaining to watch, we content creators will probably end up using a lot of footage of us engaging in really fun gunfights or blowing snorks away, but realistically, you'll probably spend more than half of the game with your gun holstered. Which is great, by the way. Getting from one area to another and spending tens of minutes just enjoying the scenery, or even longer than that in your inventory trying to keep things organized, is amazing. It just doesn't make for the best video watching experience. I'd say Clear Sky definitely has the biggest action focus as far as firefights are concerned out of the three, but even then, it's not even a majority of what you'll be doing. I say that for two reasons. First off, to assure you that that is still part of this entry, and second, as a warning. I really don't want to set someone up for disappointment if they install one of these games on my recommendation and find themselves playing something a lot more slow-paced and methodical than what they saw in my video. Like I keep saying, these are games that demand you learn how to play them, and just running around like you would in FPS blindly shooting just does not cut it here, or in the rare occasion it does, trust me, it will not work for very long. I don't think a lot of first-person shooters out there require the player to scout fights beforehand, manually select fire modes for their guns depending on how far away the enemy is, or take care of a bleeding wound to keep from losing more health. This is a very unique experience, and I doubt very much many titles would even come close to replicating it outside of this series itself and the game specifically trying to emulate this series. But I think this little anecdote will do a much better job describing this game's depth than I ever could. At one point in Call of Pripyat, you'll find one of the down choppers you're looking for, only it crashed in an area surrounded by a minefield. Now, you could certainly just save scum your way to the other side by quick saving every time you move an inch without being blown sky high. Trust me, I've done it. But you could also pull out the bolts you throw to track the boundaries of anomalies and toss them to see where each mine is based on the sound it makes when it hits the ground. The game never once tells you to do this or even hints that it's possible. It sort of just counts on you thinking in real life terms, and that's what makes Stalker so damn special. So even if I focus on negatives here in this video, think of them more as tiny bumps across what is an otherwise smooth surface. The core of a Stalker game is most definitely here, and while I do like some of the mechanics seen in other titles, this is without a doubt an amazing experience in its own right. I bring up the stuff I don't like because the rest is just all the positives I've spent 3 videos listing at this point. Stalker is a series that's carved a small space out for itself, and across all 3 entries, you'll find all of the things that makes the series special as a whole. There are small and large differences in how each approaches that core experience, but they all get to the same destination. The point I'm taking a very long time to make here is that grading a single Stalker game is really hard. There's sort of a package deal, and I love that package. And yes, you do have my express permission to use that quote out of context. If Stalker sounds like a fun concept to you, you'll likely enjoy all 3 games, but if it doesn't, there's not going to be a single entry in the series that'll change your mind over another. If you do want to tackle COP, which I 100% recommend you do, I'd suggest something like Arsenal Overhaul mod with the optional gun damage component for a first-time playthrough, and then maybe something like Gunslinger or Misery for a totally different but equally fun experience. But hey, even if you want to go full vanilla, Call of Pripyat is an amazingly atmospheric game that'll just suck you into its world. Like its 2 predecessors, it can be tough to get into, but once you've spent the time learning its tricks, it will reward you with gameplay I truly believe you can't find anywhere else. So if you can, get your hands on Call of Pripyat. Most consider it to be the best game in the series, and it is really damn hard to argue with them. No matter how it stacks up in the franchise, though, it is very much deserving of a playthrough. And if everything I've just said has failed at getting you interested, may I direct your attention to mutated abominations running full speed through a minefield. Enjoy. If you've been watching this series from the beginning, you might have noticed a trend. Each Stalker sequel basically rearranges all the previous game's assets and adds to them just enough to straddle that thin line that separates full-blown sequel and early 2000s expansion pack. And it doesn't take a genius to divine that GSC Game World would have the same approach to Call of Pripyat. Of course, that's not some kind of underhanded jab. Once again, this game was released just a year after its predecessor, and more importantly, we Stalker fans are okay with this method. Not only does it give us a chance to see familiar locations, guns, lighting tricks, and UI elements, but it also helps contribute to the zone feeling like a shared universe across all 3 games. A lot of games that continue past a few entries tend to look for that mascot type of element they can repeat in order to ensure people always associate each release with the last, but by this point in the series, Stalker had embedded its entire visual presentation into our minds. Now, in any other context, I know this would sound like a downside, but you really have to play these games one after the other to experience the effect it has on you. It really is something else. Like I've already mentioned, I'm using the Arsenal Overhaul mod to get footage for this video, and I am happy to say it leaves almost everything that isn't a gun model, scope, suppressor, or sound effect unchanged, which means what you're looking at right now is basically what I saw on release day, except with much better firearms to mess around with. More returning motifs include the typical look for the more recognizable factions in the zone. They may have added some new armor types, or maybe not, really I can't tell, but regardless you will always know whether or not it's duty authoritarians or hippie-ass freedomers coming at you from across the map.
Here's to a good day's work.
This time around, they didn't reuse any locations from the previous 2 games, a fact that truly does sadden me, but on the bright side, these new areas look amazing. Well, I guess Pripyat does sort of count as a reused location, but this is a completely different part of the city than we saw in either of the last games, so technically I'm still correct, which means I can go to sleep tonight not hating myself. Each of these new areas are pretty jam-packed with content like villages, warped landscapes, or abandoned factories, but there's enough empty space in between them to make sure it doesn't feel like a video game level, but instead a real place you might get a look at when pointing Google Earth at some disheveled abandoned town in Eastern Europe. Veterans will probably recognize the same models and textures for trees and grass, which is fine because these were okay enough looking anyways, but they did add new 2D elements like icons for story missions, artifacts, and the rare new firearm, along with some UI elements that I really enjoyed. I think I might have liked Zatan the most out of the 3 new spots because it had the most cool stuff to look at and explore, but trust me, there is stiff competition as far as that goes. That might also be because of the Stalker-based Zadovsk, which is a very cool visual with its rusted skeleton sticking out, making it eerily similar to some big animal like a whale being left on some beach shore to rot under the sun. The anomaly fields in this area are just too damn cool with that trademark, almost alien landscape sort of look to them. The coolest being a huge scar left in the earth by what I'm not sure, but it irradiates psychic energy, and getting near it without serious protection will have you hallucinating till your brain basically melts in your head. Right next to the scar, there's a huge, nearly collapsed bridge, and this is another example of the incredible environmental storytelling you can find around every corner in the zone. There are tens of abandoned military vehicles on this bridge, and I don't really know what the hell they're doing there. We do know the military did have a strong presence in the zone before the second disaster and might have been wiped out while crossing the bridge, but the military is also well known for mounting failed assaults on strategic targets in this world. Case in point, the catalyst for this game's story. Now sure, there's probably some kind of dialogue or journal entry that'll explain this, but I love just hypothesizing about it and letting my brain go crazy with the mystery of it all. Now, I have been complimenting Zatan a lot, but that's not to say the area around Jupiter or Pripyat isn't as impressive, but I think there's something about Zatan that just makes it a little more memorable to me. Okay, so admittedly, it's been all upside so far, but there is one really perplexing and, well, disappointing aspect of COP's presentation to consider. Remember my Clear Sky video where I talked about the lighting and God rays being amazing to look at but really chewing up system resources? Well, it seems like the developers decided the best way to fix that issue is to basically take those features away. Alright, so that might be a little hyperbolic, but these features have been well nerfed at the very least. Even in the early hours of the day, when the sun's at its most attractive angle, lighting in outside locations just looks disappointingly flat. There aren't many dynamic shadows to marvel at anymore, and the God rays might as well not exist. Now, like I said, I most definitely did complain about how much these tricks ate into my FPS last time, but I sort of expected them to maybe tighten the effects up or make them more efficient to run on higher-end hardware. I didn't think they would essentially remove them. Even when I set God rays to their highest setting, I still don't get anywhere near Clear Sky's medium setting. That volumetric dynamic lighting reflecting off the zone really added to Clear Sky's impressive look, and now that they've been either severely crippled or outright removed, you really start to see just how much work they were doing. Now, Call of Pripyat is still a good-looking game for its time, but thanks to its killer-looking volumetric light sources and reflections, Clear Sky looks near on par with a modern game. A point that gets driven home pretty damn hard in COP when a storm starts up and you get to see short flashes of some amazing dynamic shadows and reflections when lightning strikes. I've got to assume the guys at GSC Game World just weren't able to patch the holes in their last lighting system, because I really doubt anyone on the team looked at how flat this game can seem sometimes and thought it was an overall improvement. In a strictly visual sense, this is a pretty crushing blow for someone like me who both loves the Stalker games and is interested in graphical effects, but if I'm being honest, one of the other reasons it sticks out so hard is that it's just about the only flaw I can think of. Call of Pripyat, minus my obsessive lighting complaints, looks incredible. Sure, there are things you may not like about its visual presentation, but those are problems that have been with the series from the start. So maybe it's not really feasible to get mad that this game looks how it does when it's the third entry in a series of games that all basically look just like this. Stalker as a series may look amazing given its small development team, but it's really easy to forget it was a fairly budget title. Even when it was at its most successful, it still would have been considered a financial failure by big corporations like Capcom or EA. And if you ask me, that not only helps mask a lot of my complaints, but amplifies the impressiveness of what was accomplished here. This series went off the beaten path in a lot of ways, but I would argue its presentation is the most outside-of-the-box element in its arsenal. You really didn't have games that looked like this back then, and even now when you do find a title that has a similar style, it's very likely one of the many Stalker clones found on the indie market. So yes, I would have definitely preferred the previous entry's lighting, but other than that, this is the same visually jaw-dropping package you can expect from any game in this franchise. Sure, there are all kinds of problems you could point out, but that feels a little counterproductive. Flat out, these guys were able to accomplish some incredible things here, and as a nerd who appreciates a good-looking game, I'd like to offer a little tip of the hat to a group of dreamers who took a shot at the AAA games industry and actually ended up landing a punishing gut punch on it. Well, fellow stalkers, I hope you had fun on this deadly little field trip to the zone. This series very well may be one of the most influential game franchises that never had a chance to see mainstream success. Stalker as an intellectual property somehow managed to elevate itself far above mere video game status by inspiring a loyal following of fans who don't just play its games. Stalkers all over the world get together in abandoned factories or empty fields to relive the adventures they had in the zone out here in the real world. And yeah, maybe that's just LARPing, but doesn't it seem way more cool when everyone wears a gas mask and carries a Russian assault rifle? These people also researched the Chernobyl nuclear disaster, and many of them have visited the site themselves based solely on a lower budget video game series released in the early 2000s. Thanks to its inspiration, coming from an already immensely interesting narrative world, Stalker manages to build a complete experience that is far more than just the sum of all of its disparate parts. What you just witnessed over the course of the last 3 videos is a landmark event in the game's medium. I'm sure a good deal of you may have never even heard of these games before coming here, but I can almost guarantee you that something you played today was influenced by them. If you ask me, this right here is something you flat out cannot get outside of these games. A level of immersion and ambiance that is without question unrivaled still to this day. And yes, I know that sounds like fanboy talk, and sure, I most definitely blindly worship at the altar of the Stalker fandom, but I am also someone who actively looks for gaming experiences that pull me into fictional worlds. With every game I put my hands on outside of a select few genres, my end goal is to fall face first into the very setting my character inhabits. I aim to lose myself in some fantasy landscape using the sight, sounds, and atmosphere coming through my screen and speakers as a guide to further get me there. And in following that very ambition, I never, and I mean never, have gotten closer to a game world than I have right here in the zone. When you play these games and start to lose yourself in them, I swear you could squint your eyes just a bit and find yourself there. These games are truly something else, and I severely hope that I've turned at least a few of you into new additions to this cult.
There's something there. Cover me.
Stalker Shadow of Chernobyl set a standard that, as of yet, has never been surpassed. Clear Sky took that foundation and built onto it several more experimental expansions, and then Call of Pripyat took the most successful elements from the two and married them into one incredible package. If you get just one message from this retrospective, make it this. You owe it to yourself to experience one of, if not the most atmospheric, immersive, engaging, and flat-out jaw-dropping pieces of media ever created. And trust me, I know that sounds crazy to say. I mean, think about the ridiculousness of some odd little Ukrainian video game being the best of anything. But I can assure you with 100% certainty that is still very much true. So please, go find one of these games on sale for $5 to $10 on some key reseller, or hell, just hop on over to your favorite BitTorrent tracker and start downloading some disc images. Some of you might not be able to look past the sometimes dated visuals or actively combative mechanics, but for those of you who break through that barrier, you're gonna find yourself in a whole new world. And from that point on, believe me when I say no one will be able to stop you from consuming every single piece of Stalker-related media in existence. Thanks so much for following me down this irradiated path, guys. It's been a real adventure. Sadly, though, that adventure has come to an end, but who knows, we may very well cross paths again. Perhaps sooner than you think, and if we do, I think you'll find that it'll be in some eerily similar circumstances. Good hunting, Stalkers.
Take off.
Maximum pulse.
The current score is
To the hate team.
2-0.
Please tell me there's no sun in the camera
Time
lens.
to switch things
Alright,
up.
there's some. Take some matters as well. If I lose a game, but I perform exceptionally well, it doesn't seem like it's necessarily counting towards that loss. Case in point, the games we had earlier today, where we went Broke games. Tweets on the Valorant match fixing scandal. I'm not defending it, but like I can see why they would do it in tier 2. There's no money otherwise.
Their team's capture progress has passed the halfway point. Us against the world.
Bro, they have a support up every fucking half fight.
Don't mess with the amazing Spider-Man! Don't quit on me now, little buddy. Oh, did you see that?
I really don't know what I can do, chat.
Just what the doctor ordered.
You'll have to keep fighting it.
Dangerous! I was looking for one of these. Oh, sweet moves, right? Your powers are
This is a shame because their fucking support is dog shit. The VOD reviews, yeah. We're also doing the dojo, and you can check on the auditor coach. Your MAs jinx you guys so hard. I don't know. This team sucked ass. Their Loki is so fucking bad at the game too. That's the worst part. We literally avoided him because he's so trash. He's got lucky. Loki. Our DPS went 0 and 6. Well, not 0 and 6. Well, if it went 0 and 6, 18, 13. Was he just shooting tanks the whole game? Oh, he was on Punisher and Moon Knight. He did nothing.
Hello guys. Today we have a list of top 5 crackhead. Número 5. Crackhead. Número 4. Crackhead Dance. Número 3. Crackhead Drift. Número 2. Crackhead Speak.
Koje droge koristite?
Droge? Ne, ja se ne drogiram, folklor je moja droga.
Honorable mention. Número 1. Crackhead Spin.
Víctor.
Did you know
Your average high-end car today runs on about 90 to 100 million lines of code. Just for comparison's sake, a chill F-35, you know, the thing they used to send 1,100 kilometers per hour precision-guided gifted baskets to the Yemenis singing YOLO in Arabic near the Red Sea? Yes, for that 5th gen F-35, Lockheed Martin managed to write all the software in less than 25 millions of code. Let that sink in. The same species that can't figure out how to make a printer work without throwing it out of the window is now building cars that require more computing power than machines designed to break the sound barrier and rain hellfire from the sky. Do you remember when cars were just cars? Engine goes brrr, wheel goes round, you go forward. Well, congratulations on being an ancient relic, sir, because those days are gone. In the 70s, electronics made up about 5% of the car's cost. Today, it's more than 40%. 40. Nearly half of what you're paying for isn't even a car anymore. It's a rolling iPhone with wheels that occasionally refuses to close your sunroof. But technology makes things better, right? Wrong. Dead wrong. For every genuinely useful feature, there are at least 5 electronically controlled absolute nonsense features whose only job is to break down exactly 3.5 days after your warranty expires. Very suspicious. It's almost like they planned it that way. We've gone from simple mechanical machines that any roadside mechanic could fix with basic tools and a bit of jugaad to computerized nightmares that leave professional technicians scratching their heads while the OBD scanner just shrugs and says, "Yep, something's definitely fucked, mate. Good luck figuring that out." This might be an extreme example, but in the first 2 minutes of Matt Armstrong's latest video, you can see how painfully he tries to explain the state of his Lamborghini Ruvelto, how his OBD scanner displays just one error, and how Lamborghini shamelessly asked him to pay 30,000 euros to remove that error. Car manufacturers have basically turned all of us into unpaid beta testers. Hey, how about we replace this perfectly functioning door handle with an electronic pop-out sensor that fails during mild rain? No backlash? Awesome. Consider it done. The worst part is we just keep buying them. Shame on us. But that's a different video for another day. Today, let's take a peek into this electronic hellscape to understand how we got here, why it's costing you lakhs in repairs, and why some people and some manufacturers, yes, car manufacturers, are finally saying enough of this bullshit. Let's first talk about the absolute genius of modern automotive design, taking perfectly functional mechanical parts and replacing them with electronic versions that fail spectacularly. Exhibit A, door handles. A door handle used to be a literal metal lever. Pull it, door opens. Revolutionary, I know, but Tesla said, no. That's too reliable. Let's make it electronically retract into the car body and only come out when the computer feels like it. In 2019, a man in Florida literally died in a Tesla because after a crash, the fancy electronic door handles wouldn't present themselves. Firefighters couldn't get in and he couldn't get out. Remember this the next time someone brags about their car's sleek flush handles. Here's another gem. The average Range Rover has so many warning lights that owners often joke, if your dashboard is not lit up like a Christmas tree, something's probably broken. These luxury SUVs cost more than 1 crore and have electronic systems so interconnected that your door sensor is connected to your climate control module, which is connected to your infotainment system, which talks to your central body computer, which controls your headlights, which is why when your passenger door doesn't fully latch, your high beam stops working. And the genius mechanic solution? So, we need to replace all 5 modules because we can't tell which one is sending the corrupt signal. That'll be 2.5 lakh rupees, sir. Cash or card? And don't get me started on the touchscreens. Studies show that using a touchscreen while driving is more dangerous than driving drunk. Car companies removed physical buttons that you could feel without looking and replaced them with glass panels that force you to take your eyes off the road for 5 seconds just to turn on the fucking AC. And they call this innovation. Next time your friend shows off their giant Tesla-style touchscreen, I'm sure it wouldn't be completely illegal to casually mention that they'd be safer chugging Old Monk behind the wheel. That being said,
alcohol is bad. You shouldn't drink alcohol. And as for drugs, well, drugs are bad. You shouldn't do drugs.
Because think about this for a second. In monsoon season, what happens when water goes into those fancy electronic systems? In the good old days, your carburetor might flood, but you could dry it out. Now, water hits one of the 10 billion sensors and your entire car goes into limp mode, which is basically your 15 lakh rupee machine saying, I've decided to stop working properly and I'll let you crawl home at 20 kilometers per hour on a 6-lane highway while everyone else zooms past you at 120 kilometers per hour. The most ridiculous part, as cars get more advanced, they're actually getting less reliable. JD Power literally publishes this data every year. The more high-tech a car is, the more problems it has. That's not me saying, that's science, bitch. So the next time you're shopping for a car and the salesman is showing off all the advanced features, just remember, it's just another thing waiting to break in the most expensive way possible. Now let's talk about money.
Hello, I like money.
What inspired you to build a second Krusty Krab right next door to the original?
Money!
Or rather, the lack of it once your car's computer decides to off itself. Remember when fixing your car meant replacing physical parts you could see? A fan belt, a spark plug, maybe a carburetor? Those days are gone, my friend. Now you get to experience the joy of paying 85,000 rupees for a new engine control module because your car won't start. That's right, a tiny circuit board smaller than your phone costs more than people's monthly salary. A basic ECU replacement in a fairly high-end car costs around 50,000 to 1 lakh, and that's before labor and programming fees. Programming fees, yes, they're literally charging you money to tell the computer to behave like a computer. And good luck trying to fix it yourself or at your trusted local mechanic, because modern cars are now designed with what I call financial DRM. Your Scorpio's body control module is electronically paired to your specific vehicle. Try to replace it with a perfectly good used part? Sorry, the dealer won't activate it. So we cannot reprogram vehicles with used parts. Translation: either you pay us 90,000 rupees for a new module or your power windows and AC will never work again. It gets better. Dead infotainment in a Fortuner? 1.2 lakh rupees. That is 9 months of rent in Tier 2 India, blown in one visit to the service center because a 30 rupees capacitor fried. Why so expensive, you ask? Because your genius car manufacturer decided that the screen should also control your climate settings, your backup camera, and your car's diagnostic systems. At this point, I'm pretty sure that the sun will run out of hydrogen before they start using separate systems that don't all fail together. This is why people are junking otherwise perfectly good cars. When the repair quote is nearly 40% of the car's current value, it makes zero sense to invest in repairs. Maybe that's exactly what the future of consumerism looks like. A repairless world where everyone always buys everything new. A decent car today has between 30 to 100 electronic control units. Each one costs between 15,000 rupees to 1 lakh rupees to replace. Do the math. Your 10-year ownership cost isn't just about fuel and service anymore. It's also about whether or not you will win the lottery where one of these computers decide to stop processing their ones and zeros. And the best part is that the manufacturers act clueless. Tesla took years to admit that their memory chips were dying like flies. Jeep's evil TIPM was a litigation waiting to happen. Yet, they still keep shipping. Customers became lab rats and cars rolled out half-baked like student projects running on instant noodles. So the next time your uncle is bragging about his new ride's 64-color ambient display and gesture-controlled sunroof, just smile and ask, and how much will it cost when this fancy shit breaks? Extra points if you ask in front of all the other relatives.
All my niggas, Nazis, nigga,
but here's the good news. People are finally saying enough of this bullshit. The rebellion has begun and it's glorious. Did you know that 90% of drivers hate touchscreens in their cars? That's not an exaggeration. It is actual research that shows 9 out of 10 people prefer physical buttons for basic functions. And car companies are finally listening. Volkswagen's head of design recently admitted, "We messed up with the all-touch controls. We will never ever make this mistake again." A car is not a phone. The most fascinating part of this rebellion? There's a new EV truck coming called the Slate truck that's deliberately going backwards. It has manual crank windows. Manual crank windows in a brand new 2024 electric vehicle. It's also got a molded plastic body with no paint, although you can wrap it if you want a color. No power seats, no fancy infotainment system, and it's designed to be easily repaired by you, not just the dealer. Slate's math is brutal. Fewer chips, cheaper build, lower price. Less to break means less warranty cost. Owners fix stuff with wrenches, not flash updates. It is the spiritual love child of a Tata Ace and a power bank. Ugly? Maybe. But it will start in the rain while the posh SUV next to it whines about corrupted firmware. Why is this revolutionary? Because they're selling a modern EV for around $20,000 US. That is 16 lakh rupees, by cutting out all of the electronic and non-electronic bullshit nobody asked for. Imagine an EV that's actually affordable because it doesn't have 50 computers trying to predict when you will fart so it can automatically adjust your seat ventilation. The CEO called huge screens Netflix on wheels for clowns, and Jeff Bezos tossed money at them. The rich guy sees profit in not bleeding customers dry. Imagine that. Even though Slate is an American brand and launching in America, this makes sense, especially for India. And given enough time, someone in China or India will copy-paste their exact business model down to the exact hex code of the sofas in their showrooms. But think about why we need it here. Our roads are rough. We have monsoons that flood streets, power fluctuations that fry electronics, and a culture where we actually keep our cars for 10 plus years instead of leasing new ones every 3 years like the Americans. We need cars that don't turn into expensive paperweights when one sensor fails. Old school heroes get fan love too. Suzuki Jimny, Toyota 4Runner, even plain Jane Dacia Sandero. Real buttons, crank levers, and resale values climbing like meme stocks. Because when the apocalypse arrives, nobody cares about gesture-controlled ambient lighting. Even European safety regulators are now rewarding car makers for putting physical buttons back in cars. They literally said manufacturers are on notice, they've got to bring back buttons. Your safety is literally at risk every time you have to look down at a touchscreen to turn on your damn AC. Look, at the end of the day, there's nothing wrong with good technology when it makes sense. Advanced safety systems like ABS and stability control, amazing. Fuel-saving engine computers, wonderful. But a dashboard that looks like a bloody spaceship just to impress your neighbor, that's not technology. That's just showing off at the expense of your wallet and safety. Tech can save lives, sure. But do we need Siri controlling the sunroof? Do we need motorized seatbelt presenters that break on day 500? Lines were crossed, probably snorted. Enough. So the next time you're car shopping, maybe ask, can I still roll down the windows if the battery dies? Or more broadly, is there a manual alternative to whatever ass backward shit you're offering me? No? Then how much to replace this gimmick when it dies? The next words out of the salesman's mouth should be enough to get a good idea of the manufacturer's intentions with your hard-earned money. Simplicity is the new luxury. Real knobs, real reliability, real freedom. The future can be electric without being an electronic clown car. Grab a seat, crank a window, and enjoy the ride. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more content like this. And while you're here, please take a look at our other channel for more serious and in-depth content. See you in the next video.
Tonight, I wear a hat. Richard wears a hat. And James wears a hat.
返しましょう。
お姉様。
あなたの6ヶ月、この6ヶ月戦っノリコ、エクセリオンは健在。私たちの左下方にいるわ。
お姉様、あれを使うわ。
え、よくってよ。
脱退したガンバスターをただのマシンと思わないでよ。コーチの心がこもってるんだから。
ノリコ、敵機直上、急降下。下からも来るわ。約3000。引きつけるのよ。
シールド！バスターシールド！思ってもみなかったわ。
さすがね。
でもコーチの作ったガンバスター甘く見ないでほしいわ。ダブルバスターこれだ！うわ
エクセリオン、中心部へ到達。
If you caught the last 3 videos in this retrospective, there's a good chance you're left with a few bullet points. 1. Stalker is the most innovative and ahead of its time video game series in recent memory, and 2. It has an incredibly strong modding community that keeps all 3 games in steady rotation to this day. And you know, working on a full series retrospective for these games can be a little hard. The mods for Stalker can be flat out incredible, and there's a constant pressure to cover a few of them. But then the question becomes, well, which ones? And more importantly, which ones do I not cover? If you choose Misery, people are going to ask why you didn't include Gunslinger, and if you decide on Complete, well, they're going to wonder why the hell you didn't touch on Lost Alpha. So it becomes a game of either racking your brain trying to come up with one that'll please everyone, which is impossible, or you just submit yourself to covering all of them, aka saying goodbye to your free time and accepting that the next 5 or 6 years are going to be filled with wall-to-wall Stalker mods. For a long time, if you were going to talk about Stalker online, this little conundrum would come up in one way or another. But then Call of Chernobyl came out, the Stalker mod to end all Stalker mods. This landmark project included all of the content from all 3 releases and stuffed it inside a single package. Truly an impressive feat of craftsmanship if there ever was one. And for a long time, ZOC was the gold standard in this little scene. That is, until the release of something that would take a perfect concept and somehow further perfect it. Oh, and it's free too. Interested yet? If not, trust me, you will be. Stalkers, welcome to the zone. Stalker Anomaly is, and I'm not going to mince words here, fucking amazing. What you're looking at is the original intent GSC Game World had when starting this franchise, but thanks to budget, time, and other concerns, they never quite achieved. But I'm sure at least a few of you are wondering, what the hell does that mean? Basically, this mod is a combination of every location, item, NPC, mechanic, and concept ever seen in an officially released Stalker title wrapped into one package with a whole lot of additions. In fact, there's so much new to talk about here, this might end up being a pretty short video, because my only options are to either cover every single tweak this mod has made and resign myself to the process of making an 8.5-hour video, or gloss over some things and make sure I still have a wife after this project. Anomaly is set just a little bit after the official events in the Stalker timeline in roundabout 2018, so that means Strelok has already made his way to the center 3 times, and as a result, we have a very different zone from a veteran's perspective. You take on the role of, well, whatever you want, really. The idea is for you to formulate your own reasons for coming here. It seems like the only thing the team behind Anomaly are providing you with is a bunch of stuff to do once you figure all that out. You can start a new game belonging to literally any faction you want, which only causes one small conflict since Clear Sky was supposed to have been totally wiped out after the events of the second game. Of course, those guys do pride themselves on keeping their existence hidden, so that doesn't exactly require a lot of suspension of disbelief to accept. When you do decide on the faction you want to join, you have an absolutely staggering amount of options to figure out before you pop out your first detector and go artifact hunting. My favorite, and the one I recommend you go for, is Story Mode, which has 3 separate quest lines to check out. And I would love to tell you how much content that equals out to, but for reasons we'll discuss later, I've yet to even see the ending of the first one, despite dedicating some serious time to it over the last 2 weeks. If you're feeling like adding a bit of roguelike to your Stalker experience, you can start up a game in Azazel mode, which has you inhabiting a random Stalker's body every time you die. The cool part being that this will be an actual Stalker that exists in your game. So there's a non-zero chance you might have already come across this person and now you have to pick your progress back up with all of their gear. I would only recommend this game mode for absolute psychopaths, which basically means anyone who's put more than 100 hours into a Stalker game. There's a survival mode, which will have zombies spawning in at increasing intervals, the goal being to see how long you can make it until the zombie horde eventually takes out everything and everyone. There's also an option that applies to all of those modes that has parts of the zone only opening up once you've physically found a route there or talked to someone who has. Then there's the warfare option that'll have the zone's factions acting a little more dynamically and with a bit more freedom than usual. That means strongholds can be taken over at any point, and you can play a role in who owns what if you want to. This mode makes the hectic randomness of the zone even more insane, a feat I used to think was impossible. And speaking of sanity, if you have little to no value for your own, you can enable Iron Man mode, which will delete all of your saves upon death. Honestly, I get irrationally pissed off just thinking about the idea of checking this box. There's also a campfire mode, which is a mechanic fresh out of the Souls titles. In this mode, you won't be able to save your game unless you come across an area where a campfire can be lit. You know those people who like to dress up in leather, whip each other, and stick hooks in their back? Well, this is the Stalker equivalent of that. Then there's the aptly titled Agony mode, which only lets you save your game when you're not injured, irradiated, in combat, and most importantly, not in the middle of an emission. So there's no doubt you've got a lot to consider here when starting a new game, but personally I would recommend, if this is your first time, don't mess with any of these minus the story mode. Trust me on that. Before you start, you can select a portrait and your starting area. Obviously, that's going to be decided by your chosen faction, and you guys know me, I'm a loner through and through, so I always choose Corden because I am a slave to nostalgia. Here in the middle of the screen, you'll see what the game begrudgingly gives you for free as far as your inventory goes, and next to it are the items you can add to that inventory. Each gun, box of ammo, and med pack has a point value assigned to it, and you have a very finite pool of points to spend, so choose wisely. And for those of you who have noticed, yes, I am using a mod on top of this mod, and yes, we will most definitely talk about that in due time. Once you properly geared up, you'll spawn in at your chosen location and the hunt for whatever you're looking for begins. If you chose to start at Corden like I did, there's a sort of newbie initiation quest line, and it's something I would recommend you go through even if you're already well versed in the Stalker series, because it'll give you some tips on the new mechanics. Plus, and most importantly, the quest giver will hand over a good amount of ammo for your chosen weapons and an artifact container. An item that fits so well into these games, I'm almost positive it was a planned feature in the originals. As most of us already know, artifacts created in the zone tend to retain varying levels of radiation, but for whatever reason, that radiation only ever affected you when that artifact was equipped. Well, this game takes that idea just a little bit further into realism by having those artifacts irradiate you while they're just sitting in your inventory. So you get one of these lead-lined boxes, which will keep them from burning a hole through your pack, or more importantly, you. There's also smaller versions of these boxes that'll let you negate a single artifact's radiation while still equipping it to your belt, and I think that's a great little microcosm of what you can expect to find in this game. Everything that was just given to you in the series proper now has to be fought for tooth and nail. Thought it was kind of hard dealing with all the dangers of the zone on top of needing to eat in the originals? Well, now you need to make sure you get enough sleep and drink enough water as well. Was finding artifacts fun before? Well, now you need to make sure your detector has an up-to-date database of artifacts in it, otherwise you could be standing on top of one and you would never know. Anomalies are now 1 or 2 hit instant kills unless you've got some amazing resistance built into your gear, and the firefights. Jesus, don't even get me started on these firefights. Like I've said about 1,000,000 times before, in the original Stalker games, I always approach combat from a long-distance perspective. I like taking pot shots from afar, thus lowering my chances of getting caught by a stray bullet. But here in Anomaly, it doesn't really matter how you approach a shootout. If you're not utilizing cover properly or exposing yourself too much to line up a shot, you'll be dead before you're even able to figure out who it was that shot you. I know this sounds like some kind of hyperbole or exaggeration, but no joke, early on in a run of Anomaly, I found it was actually a welcome upside when I would die to what seems like random gunfire but could actually see the person who killed me. And I think this is a good time to mention why this might look so different for people used to vanilla Anomaly. I'm practicing a little modception by using Provac's weapon overhaul, something that I feel really elevates the gunplay in this game to something that's mostly fun but sometimes totally unfair. On top of that, it changes the game's look by adding new environmental effects, character models, and a nearly infinite list of alterations. In some ways, these can be downsides for purists, like the 3D models look very different, and they increase the overall contrast of the game and added some odd shading around those 3D models, but the second you start hearing the crackle of far-off gunfire, or get into one of those fights yourself, you will be glad you applied it, I promise. From the start, run-of-the-mill bandits and mercs will have the same access to high-power weaponry that you do, and they will not be afraid to use it, so any fight you find yourself in will become a genuine life-or-death scenario. With this add-on, shootouts become this amazing white-knuckle experience, and it'll only take you 1 or 2 deaths coming from some unseen enemy till you start really learning the value of good cover and checking your surroundings often. Like you'd imagine, given the name, this weapon overhaul comes with a shit ton of new firearms to try out, but to be honest, at this point, it's a bit ridiculous. I mean, yeah, it is cool having so many choices, but realistically, there's maybe 5 or 6 guns that are worth using in each category. if that. Don't get me wrong, I really do respect the painstaking dedication they had towards making these pew-pews more true to life, but I don't think it was necessary to include nearly every bolt-action rifle put into production during World Wars I and II. On top of that, it seems like some of these guns maybe were taken from other projects or worked on by other people. Sometimes I would come across a great weapon and put an ACOG scope on it, but it would act differently than the last few guns I tried it on, which is a little hard to explain, so let me try. Some firearms use your more traditional method of looking down a scope by blacking out the rest of your view, but some of them only slightly zoom into the scope's view while blurring your peripheral sight, which would be pretty easy enough to get used to if it was consistent within the game, but I often found that the same scope would act differently depending on what gun I mounted it to. On top of that, some scopes will render your view at a different frame rate than what you're running the game at. And like you'd imagine, going from 100 FPS to around 30 with a click of a mouse button can be really disorienting. It may be hard to tell since this video is going to be compressed down to 60 FPS anyways, but trust me, it is jarring as hell. This caused me to pass up a great rifle or shotgun a few times because I knew I'd either have to get used to tracking a target at a severely compromised frame rate or just rely on iron sights for very long-range shots, neither being a good option in the zone. Oh, and some guns won't work with some scopes, so for example, you might find an EOTech LED scope will render its reticle outside of its 3D model when attached to certain weapons, which really sucks, but is kind of to be expected for an add-on released by a bunch of people who aren't getting paid. I also found that some guns use very low frame rate animations, so reloading and running with your gun out might seem very choppy. This messed me up because I kept thinking the game itself was slowing down, then I'd move my mouse around to change my view and everything would be fine. Which, yes, is very disorienting, but realistically, this only happens with a very small percentage of the weapons on offer here, so that's okay, and again, a bunch of people not getting paid here. Continuing with the downsides, mutants in this mod are an absolute force of nature. The boars in Cordon can kill you in 1 or 2 hits, which wouldn't be so much of a big deal if that wasn't the starting point most people will find themselves in the very beginning of the game. Even when you tweak the trader economy and the options, it's gonna be a good long while till you can afford armor that'll stand up to that kind of abuse, and even when you do, it's gonna cost you a majority of your cash every time you take a hit from these assholes, since you're gonna need to find a technician to service your tattered armor. I mean, don't get me wrong, a round of 5.56 flying through the air will have a similar effect, but at least bandits aren't out here breaking the land speed record and jumping at me from 20 feet away. Thanks to this, I had to tweak the game to almost never spawn mutants, which is a real shame because dealing with mutants is sort of a key part of this series. To be honest though, it seems to me the real focus with most Stalker mods is to further emphasize the human-on-human violence and let the mutants act as mobile anomalies, just hazards you'll need to avoid most of the time. If possible, I'd love to try out an add-on one day that balanced the mutants so that fighting them would be just as satisfying as shooting it out with NPCs. And speaking of NPCs, I loved how they took the radio callouts from Clear Sky and made them into the Stalker equivalent of Twitter. Every little thing that goes down in the area you're in will likely be noticed by someone, and they'll radio everyone else on an open channel if it's worth talking about. So if you're in the middle of a shootout, you might see other stalkers saying they heard rifle fire near the cement factory or something like that. They always include a location, and sometimes they'll even accurately identify what kind of weapon you're using just from the sound it makes. The cool thing is they do this for everyone, not just you, which can come in real handy before you get your hands on an upgraded PDA that tracks groups of stalkers. So in the early game, if you hear about Monolith fighters shooting it out with a squad of duty members, you can either steer clear of that area or just wait a bit and try to loot the corpses. That is, of course, if someone hasn't already beat you to the punch. But I imagine some of you guys caught that last part where I said I tweaked the game in the options, and yes, that is one of the absolute best features Anomaly has to offer. You know, other than the whole it being free thing. If you go into the options menu, you'll find some kind of modifier for just about any system or mechanic you could think of. Everything from how much money your loot sells for to how tall the grass is. Hell, you could even control the moon cycles or how often you see cloudy weather. Almost every part of the game can be messed with here, and if I were you, I'd start a new game, fiddle with the options till you find a sweet spot that works for you, then start over for a serious run. And I say that because that's exactly what I had to do. On my first try, I got to the Agriprom Underground and found myself completely out of ammo and healing supplies, but too far from a merchant or technician who could help me with that. Of course, I later found out you can fast travel just by right-clicking on a landmark you've already discovered, so we'll just call that a few hours of my life I'll never get back. If you do end up in some kind of an unwinnable situation, there is a debug menu that'll let you further modify things by spawning in items or NPCs, activating God mode, start or stopping storms, changing the time of day, and just about every other single thing you could imagine, so don't let my horror stories get you too discouraged, because you do have a nuclear option if you need to use it. I say that because, well, there's no getting around it. This is a massively difficult game, even on the easiest setting, but the devs seem to have put a lot of effort into letting you control just how hard it hits you, and I think that's an important point. This mod was specifically made to be incredibly challenging. Remember how I told you you need to learn how to play the Stalker series? Well, if this was a school setting, Stalker would be 4th grade science, and Anomaly would be some kind of college-level microbiology course. Knowing how Stalker works will certainly help you, but in the end, you'll need to learn Anomaly's ins and outs before it really opens up to you. About 4 or 5 hours in, I finally found my groove and figured out how to do well, and at that point, I literally could not put this game down. As I write this, I might have a good 60 or 70 hours invested, and like I said before, most of that didn't even go into completing the story quest. I've just been exploring the zone and immersing myself in this world. I think I really started falling in love with Anomaly once I stopped trying to play Stalker and just let myself learn all the new systems and mechanics it brings to the table. So yes, expect to have your ass beat into the ground if you're not used to these kind of games, like myself. But trust me when I say you will eventually get to a point where you couldn't stop playing Anomaly even if you tried. And speaking of Stalker, if you're a veteran to this series, you might be wondering, well, what's here that I haven't seen before? And the answer to that is an absolute shit ton. Any map seen in any release of Stalker so far has been stitched together for Anomaly, but there's a butt ton more. Some of these I was already able to explore in my previous favorite Stalker full conversion mod, Call of Chernobyl, but others are brand new to me. These new areas are killer to check out, and the level of detail-driven design feels about on par with what was officially released, but if I'm being honest, I was actually more of a fan of the alterations made to the maps I was already familiar with. All over the place, you'll see slight additions or outright changes to your favorite landscapes. For example, Yantar is covered in vegetation that helps it not feel so empty around the research base, and the Great Swamps from Clear Sky are almost unrecognizable in the very best kind of way. The water looks amazing, and the plant life is lush and ominous at the same time. One of the atmosphere-driven mods I'm using changes how the zone's trees and bushes act, with them swaying all over, and I'll admit this looks incredible to me. It adds to the living, breathing feeling I get from this setting, but I am frequently taken out of that experience when they continue to sway around even when there's no breeze at all. On the plus side though, running through a wooded area at night during a storm is so damn cool, it's worth suffering a little bit of jank. Speaking of nighttime, most stalkers know that their reticle will turn red when mousing over any threats, which used to be a great mechanic for cheesing the game. See, back in vanilla, you could just move your reticle around in the darkness and pop some poor bandit before he even knew you were there because you didn't need a flashlight to see him. Well, in Anomaly, your reticle darkens with the environment, so that tactic no longer works, and I think that shows that the people who made this were true stalkers through and through. Speaking of which, the guys behind this mod also added traders and technicians and strategic outposts all over the zone, which does help with the sometimes extreme difficulty of getting from point A to B. And when you use those technicians, you might also notice a new mechanic that'll let you collect crafting components in order to upgrade your firearms instead of paying an arm and a leg for someone to do it for you. I didn't mess with this too much myself, but this feels like it fits right in with the stalker mindset, so I am a fan. The same thing goes for repairing gear, which means you'll come across a lot of junk items on a run if you're like me and don't engage with these new additions so much. On the plus side though, all of these items sell for enough of a price that it's worth carting them around, so problem solved. Truth be told though, I'm a little hesitant to keep talking about new tweaks added to Anomaly because I really don't know much about them in general. Everything I've told you so far has been learned through exploration and intuition, and I sort of want to keep it that way. There are 1,000,001 new mechanics and elements to mess with, and me not knowing much about them sort of mirrors that feeling that got me interested in this series in the first place. I truly loved not knowing where the hell I was, what I was doing, or how the hell I would go about doing it, and I think I might have ruined a bit of that for myself by obsessively seeking out information on everything even remotely related to Stalker. As it is now, Anomaly gives me that same mysterious feeling, and I really don't want to speed up that feeling wearing off. I'm sure eventually I'll wrap my head around most of these things, but when I do, it'll be because I figured it out myself and not because I spent a few nights looking through wiki pages. Although if I'm being honest, it's really hard to fight the urge not to do that. For example, every once in a while there's this crazy loud crash and the area lights up like some kind of a localized lightning storm. In the dead center, whether that be 80 feet in the air or on the ground right in front of you, a sphere of light appears, and I'll be damned if I even have a clue as to what that is or what it does. This being a Stalker game, I just sort of assumed it would lead to a violent death, so anytime one of these things show up, I book it in the opposite direction. And speaking of getting the hell out of there, there's also a new type of emission in the form of a psi storm. I have no idea what it is or where it comes from, but I'm sure we can all assume the origin is some sort of cosmic horror beyond our comprehension, or maybe some busted experimental Soviet tech, either or. Alright, look guys, like I told you at the start, I'm either going to have to cut this one short or spend the next few years of my life producing this one video, and in the spirit of giving you a first experience similar to mine, I'll stop explaining things here. So instead, let's move on to my recommendation, and that's a complicated matter. First off, on the simple side of things, if you are a Stalker fan, you owe it to yourself to get this thing right now. More than likely, you're already going to have Anomaly installed, but if not, trust me, you want to get that way real quick. This is what I would like to call the true Stalker experience, not necessarily because it's any better than the originals, but because it stays so true to them. The spirit and intent behind these games remains unaltered even when such wide changes are applied, so if you've ever picked up a Stalker game and thought to yourself, damn, I wish I could get more of that, well, this mod right here is what you were wishing for. As for the newcomers in the audience, which I sort of expect to be a majority of you, I would still recommend jumping in, but do so knowing full well that this game will fight you nearly every step of the way until you figure it out. This game is unintuitive, punishingly difficult, and almost malicious with how it treats you, but when you get over that initial learning curve, you'll find one of the most rewarding and immersive gaming experiences you can possibly have. I know it's kinda dumb saying something like that when none of us can really predict how much the medium will improve with time, but I truly can't imagine a scenario where something delivers this much content in such a massively satisfying way. I know I've said this before in this retrospective, but this is really something special. Sure, Anomaly itself is a marvel of programming genius, and I couldn't even imagine the tons of digital duct tape it took to get the X-Ray engine acting this stably. But it wouldn't exist if there weren't 3 amazing video games for it to use as a foundation. If Stalker is the most immersive game in existence, and I very much think it is, Stalker Anomaly is the most immersive game in existence +1. It's everything you like about Stalker, along with anything you might have ever wished for while playing it. Of course, there are some serious downsides to consider as well. Like I keep bitching about, this game will knock your teeth out if you let it. Progress in the zone is slow to make, and you're always just a single report of gunfire away from losing that progress. On top of that, and this should go without saying, but it can be very buggy. I ran into a story mission very early on that refused to mark itself as completed, and I'm not sure if the next story mission I had on my PDA was for the same quest line or one of the other two. Well, I guess it's a good thing I'll likely be playing this game till the day I die anyways. Other than the aforementioned issues though, this is a hefty download on its own, and when you factor in the Mammoth Provac weapon overhaul and a single atmospheric mod, you're looking at an install folder that weighs in at a staggering 95 gigs. But to temper that problem, and really any issue we've had so far, both Anomaly and Provac's overhaul are totally free. I genuinely have no idea how GSC Game World hasn't already taken down this project for essentially redistributing their creative work, but let's thank our lucky stars they haven't, because without a shred of doubt in my mind, this is the Stalker concept perfected. That being said, I'll include a link to Anomaly in the description, along with Provac's weapon add-on, which I also very much recommend. Trust me, this combination is something you need to see for yourself before you truly understand how amazing it is. Sure, watching footage from online content creators can give you a glimpse at what's on offer here, but I can assure you it is only a single-digit percentage of the experience you could be having. To put it succinctly, Stalker Anomaly has consumed my life these last few weeks, and I think there's a good chance it'll have the same effect on you. If it seems far too difficult for you at first, don't worry, that's normal, but don't be too afraid to start tweaking it to your likings in the options menu. It's what I did, and I don't think any stalker worth his weight in artifacts would look down on you for ensuring you have as good a time with this game as you possibly can. So please, stop listening to my rambling and get your ass over to ModDB right now. You owe it to yourself to experience the perfect distillation of everything we love about these games. And with that, I'm gonna need to hit the road. We're headed to Moscow next. I just hope nothing crazy like, I don't know, a global nuclear war happens by the time we get there. So here's hoping I see all of you safely make it to the other side of the exclusion zone. Good hunting, stalkers. Back in the ancient prehistory days of the early 2000s, there were essentially two sides to the whole stalker console port discourse. Those who had such limited